centralized support, because this impediment was highlighted as perhaps the lack of access in terms of geographical areas. So looking at decentralized support and services to maritime and outlying communities, sometimes we get funding that allows us to reach places that even our government colleagues cannot reach. For example, my colleague from PCDF was in Moala for 2 weeks, so he was able to cover some of the work on DRR, and even some social work or social development aspects of PCDF's work. New breed of disasters, which is a little bit difficult, which we saw during the pandemic. I think the second wave we were fully cognizant of the challenges that government had, because they were still passing laws to try and respond to a health crisis. And initially we were waiting, in 2020, we were waiting for NDMO to give us the green light. But even NDMO was constrained because it was a health crisis, and they were still trying to create a policy on who shall lead the national response. But our bottoms-up approaches as civil society organization is moving towards building resilience for all types of hazards and risks. And if you recall, some of us participated in the creation of a Fiji CSO contingency plan, which is just simply rolled out a way of working and coordinating for all kinds of perhaps crises, including the political perhaps instability, which was acknowledged is not covered it's not going to be covered by NDMO, because that falls into the area of work of Ministry of Defense or Home Affairs. But we've developed, given the experiences that we've had, the networks in communities, we as a sector have started to think about how we respond across all kinds of crises that could impact on the well-being of communities. And the bottoms-up approaches that we use is useful in that sense. I guess the other aspect highlighted in the NDRRP also talks about the structural issues of poverty, hunger, conflict. So those are considered or classified as major constraints. And many of us, our roots are in tackling structural development challenges or impediments. Some of us began, a lot of our history of our organizations are rooted in our need to address those structural issues of inequality, of perhaps poverty. And so many of what we do in terms of DRR is already informed by those poverty lenses. We use conflict sensitive lenses and approaches as well. For example, we heard from Trans and Oceania at the March workshop. So many of those who have worked in sectors that we may have considered separate are already working in this disaster space, and they brought in those lenses. So a lot of what we do is the approaches have been informed by what we have learned through those the work around tackling structural issues or societal issues such as poverty. Impediments of institutional framework, where CSOs have been included, we have advocated for consistency, coordination and collaboration in government for better DRR. For example, say the Children Fiji Climate Talk, they were part of the development, the drafting of the National Relocation and SOP. So they brought a lot of that, I guess the need to connect what was being developed in that space to what we know exists in the DRR space in terms of institutional frameworks. You were asking questions about where does NDMO come, what role will they play, can we use the cluster system? So in those spaces, CSOs have begun to look at those institutional frameworks. The same goes for supporting legislations. When we've been given the opportunity, we've highlighted the need to embed climate change and DRR that nexus issues into relevant legislation, including during the review of the NDM Act, the Natural Disaster Management Act, Climate Change Act. You recall it was introduced as a bill in 2018, 2019. CSOs have also used global humanitarian standards to provide guidelines and use trained community networks in confusing situations. We've had a few of that in the last 2 years, where government restrictions could hinder humanitarian support to the affected populations. I know that we were working across borders, using our community networks when government was still trying to sort out the different perhaps responsibilities that each agency would have. But in that sort of situation, we are quick on our feet, and where we have had the opportunity, we've also brought what we've learned in our DRR space into the review of bills and the review of acts and the bills that are often introduced along the way. That has some impact on the work that we do in DRR. And in terms of national planning, again, wherever we've participated in policy forums and groups, like last week, we had the opportunity, if you were in the room, when we spoke to the Pacific Regional Infrastructure Facility brief at the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. Some of us talked about having to work in the haphazard nature, of the planning system that is in place in governments, implementation approaches, asking for clarity or realignment of roles to mandated agency. I don't know if you are familiar with the climate change and international cooperation unit, international development unit, which is responsible for the national adaptation plan, which also has some bearing on how NDRRP is done. So some of us have had the opportunity. I recall that members of the Fiji Commerce and Employees Federation and Business Disaster Resilience Council were in the room talking about the same issues. And that's because of the work and the experience that we've had in DRR, and advocating for national planning systems that are clear, that are not confusing, that allows for all stakeholders to bring their tools to the table and their strengths, so that we can ensure a national response that supports all. Impediments of government, I think our pandemic briefing, if you recall, which is often online, and our advocacy on confusing parallel systems of emergency response. I think we also talked about gaps in services to ensure support. We do know how, particularly tackling that from the angle of humanitarian standards that have to be respected and that we have to uphold when we're working and in those spaces talking to government colleagues about upholding those things as well. Sorry, this is taking a bit of time, but this is really to show how the opportunities that exist for tackling those impediments. All right, this is the last bit on the impediments. I think the awareness and trainings, this is where a lot of NGOs work. Their work in communities covering relevant DRR and CC issues help to bridge information gap across the 4 divisions. Most, if not all of us, do work on awareness and trainings. And so there's that opportunity to work together. I think some of the NGOs already have a partnership with NDMO, and so have been able to run community trainings on these issues. And some have also collaborated. So where we don't have the opportunity to implement specific technical DRR, what we've done is when we've gone into communities, we've also trying to ensure that government comes along as well. So where they are constrained by funds or perhaps resources, CSOs have tried to fund that, to create those kinds of partnerships to ensure that NDMO has that direct connection to communities as well, and bring the information around NDRR. Impediments of education, I think a lot of you work in these areas, targeting schools and education stakeholders for DRR strengthening. The existing relationships you have with Ministry of Education, you have often leveraged that to ensure that our concerns around the protection of children, particularly in emergencies and disasters, is has some tangible impacts on the education system. We've also collaborated with academia in tertiary educations, and I think that's not tracked, but I've turned up to some of these universities and found other CSO colleagues sitting there, where academia is trying to develop courses that are contextual, that are connected to some of the realities that there is out there in communities. I know that I heard this morning from someone who's studying at this, so she's sitting here as well. So you can see that there is ways in which we are already working in that space, but we're not reporting it. And so perhaps we look into ways in which we can bring that, into your monitoring and evaluation framework. Disparity among people, our work as a CSO sector, and our history and experience in reducing inequality and disparity. We've often used those to enhance our DRR programming and foster innovation in the CC and DRR. Next, for example, say the children's app, and how, I recall correctly, but there's an app that they developed. So there's a lot of innovation, but it's happening outside of the periphery of government, perhaps attention. And that's because of that lack of awareness on NDRR. So this is a great opportunity to start to bring some of this that's happening on the periphery into mainstream DRR policy discourse. So this is my last slide, and it's just really way forward, and I think things to consider as we go forward is that we can see that there's a need for strengths-based partnerships and collaboration. Why I say strength-based is we already are working in and contributing very actively to the NDRR. Perhaps our drawback is that we didn't understand the NDRR. So now is the opportunity, and I think there is the need to really push on cross-fertilizing our ideas and approaches with government, and then building partnerships that's based on strengths, the things that we've learned from working in these areas. I've made some really obvious recommendations, but the rest of the days will be left to the rest of the CSOs, the rest of the day. They will be left to my colleagues in the room to suggest other things. But off the top of my head, as I was writing this at 4 o'clock this morning, I thought, we've held maybe 3 CSO humanitarian coordination dialogues around October. And we've often set aside a session for government in that 2 days. Sometimes you get money for 2 days, sometimes you get it only for 1 day. But we often try and specify a specific session where we have a CSO and government dialogue. Before I jump into that, I just want to share that should be supported so that it helps NGOs participation in new and emerging issues from the policy and legislative arena. That's the one time that we can come together across different areas of work to talk about what we've seen as emerging humanitarian needs. And sometimes we do that without understanding where policies are and how we can connect that a little bit better. So the participation of key government agencies is crucial for DRR mainstreaming. That's strategy 1 of the DRR, national DRR policy. We've often found that the CSO government dialogue is, it can be improved in terms of meaningful dialogue. Sometimes it's just off the cuff. We often spend 1.5 days preparing for that session, but government comes in and then just leaves. And so for you to better understand how we're contributing, you have to spend some time with us and have those meaningful discussions to see how we can embed those into your monitoring, perhaps monitoring evaluation frameworks. I also think that we need to, we do a lot of work around localization. So I think that the more we decentralize from SUBA, we have divisional workshops between government and non-government first responders and humanitarian organizations, the better it is. We must do that annually, provide the opportunity to do that annually. I know that many of us in SUBA are very well aware. If we're not aware in the first quarter, we'll be aware by the second quarter because of the workshops that we have. But when it comes to those outside of SUBA, our CSO colleagues often get pushbacks outside of SUBA because government agencies across those divisions may not understand some of the policies. You'll be surprised at the way some of the government agencies do pushback on some of the work. I think that we all need to be on the same page as humanitarian responders or humanitarian organizations. So, these workshops should provide the opportunity for us to all keep ourselves abreast in terms of policies, emerging issues. So we're not fighting when we're supposed to be responding to communities at that level. We tried to do this with Fiji facility 3 years ago. We did one for SUBA, we did one for the West, and then it stopped because of the pandemic. I think it was, or we ran out of funding, but that needs to be supported. Government or any other NGO, if there is some political will for that, I think the NGOs can find the sources of funding to do those kinds of workshops. And then I think there needs to be vigorous networking and exchange between CSOs, particularly where program events and activities cover strategies of the NDRRP. I'm confident that after this, we'll be doing a lot more of that. So after our mapping, to understand exactly where we will be working, when and where, who will be targeting, I think is an opportunity to do a bit more. So it's just not between CSOs. I'm just focusing on CSOs because often we find that when we improve our bit better, when we come to government, we then know how to connect to how government programs run on this. The other bit, if you're hoping that I would come today and outline how we will do to add to the action items, I looked at it and I wasn't sure whether if you look at action items in the plan or the policy, the very government focus, I wasn't sure whether our contributions would be welcome. So my suggestion is that you extend the action items or plans or remind agencies responsible to include CSOs in action item plan, which is this one in your plan colleagues. As there are many opportunities for solidarity, because I can see some very contentious issues there and suggestions. Like for example, the policy says that the agencies should be merged, like MRD and DMO and a few others, and that has some political ramifications, which will require some solidarity in terms of advocacy. So I think there are many opportunities in this plan for collaboration, but because it's so government-centric, we're afraid to touch it. We would like you to tell us which areas are open for our engagement as civil society. In other areas of work, I think we've tried to advocate based on the needs that we found at community level through our surveys, through our work. And also, it might be helpful that you clearly articulate linkages between NDRRP and Sendai framework. As you know, there are local NGOs and also international NGOs. We might help our INGO colleagues to also be able to demonstrate that connection to their partners. And that also allows not only for easier reporting and alignment, but also potential funding or finance, which is also covered in the policy. Thank you. That was my last slide. I'm about to talk, so I'm there.
Everyone looking at Napu. But I'll open up the time for questions. We have time for questions before we get into our next agenda. Anybody questions, comment, or if you want to start a discussion for the next agenda, feel free to do so as well.
Thank you, Director, for that summary of the policy, I suppose. Quite often we get stuck to policy, and I think generally we'll all agree to the fact that quite often policies can be made. It's difficult for us to be able to monitor and execute a lot of those things. And this is not unique to Fiji or the Pacific. I think it's across the globe, where we see that at times we make policies and they may not be practical or may not be as easy to be able to follow it through or monitor it as a whole. With the DRR policy, I think it's one of those things, yeah. Quite often when it comes to disasters, we look at government and expect them to do wonders. I think let's not forget that there is limitations within the public sector. Civil society organizations, NGO, faith-based organizations, the private sector probably contribute to 80% of the entire works that's been there. I think with civil society organizations, NGO, faith-based organizations, and private sector, we are prompt to respond to a lot of these things because of the local knowledge and the capacity within. With a lot of the NGOs, their volunteers were out there, and it makes it very easy for the volunteers to be able to contribute their time and be part of the humanitarian assistance program. I think we have the ability to be able to draw resources swiftly. You know, whilst in the public sector machinery, with their policies, a lot of them are guided by policies. You cannot go outside the policy, and there's political ramifications, and there's territorial issues. I think in the NGOs, it's pretty much flexible, and I think this is where the strength lies, and this is why the civil society plays an important role, not only in operational, but in terms of policy as well. I think the policy is a guide for us to follow. We can refine it. We can always go back to the public sector and say, can we make some changes if required? I know, and I'm talking through experience, in 2016, we had one of these issues about government making a statement to say, let's stop civil society, faith-based organizations from being part of disaster relief. And that was all because of the fact we did not know who's doing what and working in what space. I think this is where we can come up and say, no, we have a strength, allow us to do it. You know, you can ring-fence it just to see what areas we can work with. I think we have the ability to be able to pre-arrange or have already allocated funding support. So I think once the police is there, unfortunately, there's a lot of duplication in a lot of places. So maybe it's worthwhile as a suggestion to NDMO is mapping of stakeholders, finding out the strengths and or geographical areas of operation as a whole. As directors mentioned, you know, look at our strengths, where our strengths, which areas, who's able to deliver swiftly and economically in a lot of areas. Quite often, you know, we've had issues. I mean, I know, and then this is no secret, but we've had organizations in Australia and New Zealand wanting to send back groceries. What do they send us? The hundreds and FMF flour and biscuits and everything we produce back. I'd rather send us the funds, we'll draw it internally, it's swifter, we save the transportation and logistics cost as a whole. At the same time, and I think it's important, the NDMO with the commission, I'm going to probably disclose this. We also have organizations who've taken the opportunity of humanitarian relief and brought in goods and items which are not for distribution for humanitarian issues. I'm aware of a case where vehicles are coming with parts and other accessories and things of that sort, and they were destined to be cleared off by an organization. Obviously, there were some relief items in there, but inside that was a more high value item. So we'll have these opportunities out there. We need to be mindful of that and make sure that we stay clear out of some of these things. More importantly, I think one of the strengths that the civil society or NGOs have is the fact that we can go and advocate for resilience. In the corporate world, private sector, we call it risk management. FBDRC is looking into doing business continuity plans for the private sector of how they are able to get back to their feet post-disaster. Better still, how they can build resilience so they can avoid being affected by a lot of these natural disasters, so to say. I'm sure with the NGOs, faith-based organizations, we have the skills to be able to go over the platform to go to individuals or communities and build resilience. So yes, one is we can say when a disaster happens, what do we do? Two, better still, if you're able to invest time, money, and resources and take a proactive resource in trying to ensure that the disaster does not happen. Quite often we rely on public sector or government to be able to do some of these changes, but I think the strength lies within the civil society organization. We have direct contact with the people, and I think we can use some practices to ensure that we either minimize or reduce the impact on these communities, because if we're able to spend time and effort now, we don't have to do recovery and response. Probably that's one of those things there. Collaboration and partnership is an important one. So Director, I'm going to, wearing my FBDRC hat, I'm willing to invite you to the next FBDRC meeting. Say, please share with us the work you have done, where the gaps are, and how private sector can come and assist. So that's an invitation to you, Director. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that contribution. Already contributing to our next agenda, which is great. Any other take in the room? Any suggestions or comments?
Great, thank you. Look, I was really interested to see point number 4 up there about vigorous network exchange. I think there's some opportunities where CSOs are already doing a lot of the work that's in the DRP in preparedness. And we have mentioned the ways that funding is always an issue, but I think that there is some opportunities for CSOs to partner more closely with government to access some of these funds that are quite complex to access, Green Climate Fund and climate adaptation funding, etc. It's it is complex for a small CSO to access that. So partnering together and CSOs perhaps being implementing partners or part of that mix, I think would benefit all. So I'm looking forward to having some vigorous networking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Any other comments before we get into group discussion? Have some confusion, but that's okay. We'll stop the question there, but not the discussion for sure. We're gonna take a break for a minute or 30 seconds, just ready to stand and stretch. Thank you. For those of you joining us online, please feel free to drop a message or the comment if you have any. I've been seeing that we're still sitting with a comfortable partner that we walk into the room with. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or not a so good thing for the next discussion, but I think it's always good to start a vigorous networking anytime, and that is going to be our next exercise. And that is, you're going to move away from your table, so when you're stretching, start packing your stuff, because the next session, except for maybe Jay, the next session you're going to have a new partner sitting beside you. Just a heads up for everyone. Okay, just where you're standing or sitting right now, we're going to go around the room. The normal way of mixing people, they're going to count from 1 to 5 before we get into a new group, starting from Doreen's table.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4.
5 is this, 1 is yes. Anyone else we missed out? 2 and 3. Number 1, first table. Number 2, 3, 4. Jay, what's your number? 2. Okay, number 2 at the back. Sorry to Jay. 1 in front. 3, 4, 5. The middle table. So that will be your first group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, when you're moving, I hope that you have the copies of the DRR with you. Unfortunately, we don't have enough copies for everyone. However, it is available online if you would like to have a copy to yourself during a discussion. We've heard about the 7 strategies, policy strategies for that corner 5 here. This is table 3, 2, 1 at the back of J. Yeah? So our next discussion is just building on the presentation that we've had already, and that is around the 7 strategies. And in addition to that, we've heard about action items as well. So from the 7 strategies, there's a total of 122 action items. Our discussion in your group is, we're going to do a mapping on what your organization have done or is planning to do around the action items. If you're wondering where the action items are, you can turn to page 63 to 79 of your DRRP, and your group is to have the discussion around the corresponding number of the policy. Yeah? So policy number 1 with group number 1 is 7. Eh? Group number 1, we have 1 and 7 because it's around mainstreaming and also knowledge. So your discussion will be around that. Group number 2, you'll start with number 2 and 3. It's around governance and the financial investment. Group number 3, you're going to look at policy strategy number 4. And group number 4, policy strategy number 5. And group number 5, policy strategy number 6. Your initial discussion, we're going to take 10 to 15 minutes before we're going to pass put your paper around to the next group. So you will have the opportunity to contribute to all the policy strategy. Don't worry if you are in a table that you think, oh, I would like to go and contribute to strategy on governance. Your turn will surely come before we break for lunch. Eh? So that's the first 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And that is, you look at the action item, as Vanya alluded to earlier, it has been government-centric. Most of the action items were designed for government departments, but that does not necessarily mean that we do not have any contribution to those action items. So feel free to expand, because our outcome from today will also help Napo and his team to articulate better or more review how we can, how CSO have contributed to the NDRR. Yeah? So any questions before we start our discussion? Policy strategy. If you're wondering where can you find more information about the policy strategy, that is in chapter 6, pages 36 to 56. You can look at the corresponding policy strategy there. Or you can just dive straight into activities, because that kind of give you a more practical approach on those strategies. Huh? Any question?
We actually do existing.
You'll note that some of your activities might not be part of the activity item. That is where you're gonna expand it. Like for strategic priorities, policy strategies for preparedness. You might be doing some activities that around preparedness, but it's not on those activity items. Feel free to add that into the list. Eh? But it's we are trying to map out what we're doing well and how we are contributing as CSO into the NDRR.
This one.
Fala por isso, sabe?
I don't know.
Posso? Isso não estou. Not tomorrow. So no hybrid tomorrow. I think so. Oh, you let me know what to do.
Because I'm still not sure. So we have to